to announce a significant next step forward in the New York City Pension Fund work toward decarbonizing our portfolio and responding aggressively to the climate crisis on the scale and timeline it demands. Everybody who's living on planet Earth knows that the climate crisis is not just coming, it is already here. We just lived through the hottest summer on planet Earth, preceded only by the one before that and the one before that. We've seen the growing strength of hurricanes. We know it's only a matter of time before New York City itself will see another flash flood storm like Tropical Storm Ida or Ophelia, or a coastal storm like Superstorm Sandy. And we all have a responsibility to take all the steps we can to mitigate that future. And for New York City, and that means looking at whatever assets you have and doing the things you can to make sure we're responding. For our city as a whole, that means our buildings and our transit. In the New York City Comptroller's office, that means our city's pension funds, now $285 billion of assets under management, that are the retirement savings of our teachers and firefighters and school crossing guards and public hospital nurses and auditors and accountants in this building as well, all of whom work hard on behalf of our city and to whom we promise retirement security. And while we're saving that money, we are charged, and it is a sacred responsibility in the Comptroller's office to make sure that we earn a maximum risk-adjusted return. They are our beneficiaries, and we have a fiduciary duty to them. And at the same time, to be thoughtful and responsible in how we invest those dollars for the long term. We're both universal investors, meaning we invest broadly in the economy all across sectors and all across the planet, and we're long-term investors. A first-year teacher who starts teaching this year, we hope will teach for a few decades and then retire for a few decades. So with that first-year teacher teaching this year, we already have pension fund obligations that run out near to the end of the century. And when you're a universal investor and a long-term investor, that means responsible investing, means understanding the systemic risks we face, and it is from that perspective, deeply grounded in our duty to all of those municipal workers when we say climate risk is financial risk, and it is incumbent on us as investors to take a systemic risk lens on our portfolio and make sure we are seeing what is coming, what the risks are to our planet and our portfolio from the impacts of climate change, and to see where the opportunities are as well, because investing in a clean energy economy, in renewable energy, and in climate solutions is the way to grow our portfolio and to protect it from the risks we face. That's why the New York City pension funds were proud to be the first large U.S. public pension funds in the country to divest fossil fuel reserve owners in our public equities holding, a step taken in partnership with many of the advocates in the room and with real rigor in how it was prepared and brought to the trustees and voted on and then implemented. That's why the New York City pension funds were proud to be the first U.S. public pension fund to exclude exploration and drilling in fossil fuel infrastructure from its private equity investments last year. That's why the New York City public pension funds have been proud to lead shareholder advocacy, to push banks to disclose and make the transition to clean energy, to push utilities to make the transition to clean energy, and to adopt the most ambitious net zero implementation plan of any public pension fund in the country. And that brings us to today, when we are taking an exciting and important next step. I am proud to announce today that I will be supporting and excluding all midstream and downstream fossil fuel infrastructure. That means pipelines, distribution facilities, liquid natural gas terminals, all midstream and downstream fossil fuel infrastructure from future private markets investments of the New York City pension funds. Yay. That's a big step, has not yet been taken by any large U.S. public pension fund, and we'll have some work to do together to put it into place. This decision comes of mine to support this and bring the proposal to the trustees, both in dialogue with many of the groups in the room who you're going to hear from, and as part of our process of joining the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, a global alliance of asset owners and both public pension fund and other asset owners like us. And part of that process is looking through your various policies. And one of the policies that's critical to look at in that process is this set of questions around upstream, where we had already acted, and midstream and downstream fossil fuel infrastructure in our private markets investments. So I am instructing the Comptroller's Bureau of Asset Management to do the research, as we have done when we have taken past steps of this sort, and bring to our trustees the case for excluding midstream and downstream fossil fuel infrastructure in our private markets holdings, showing how it is consistent with our fiduciary duty, as I stated at the beginning, and consistent with our long-term plan for growing our portfolio, because economic growth on this planet is not going to come from LNG terminals and natural gas pipelines. It's going to come from renewable energy, from more solar, from more wind. It's going to come from climate solutions as we make the transition. I'm proud to tell you that today, thanks to a decision that we made a couple of years ago as part of our net zero implementation plan, holdings that we have in renewable energy and climate solutions are now at $11 billion. That's nearly 3 times the amount we ever had in fossil fuel reserves. So this is not only a decision to confront the systemic risks posed by burning fossil fuels, it is part of a broader decision to make the transition to clean energy and renewables and climate solutions that will help us grow our pension fund holdings and secure a thriving renewable future for New York City and the planet we live on. And I'm thrilled to be doing that alongside this great set of allies, all long-term partners in the work. And I'm delighted to introduce them to you, and then I'll come back at the end and talk a little more about the process and take your questions. But thank you guys all very much for being here. We really appreciate it. It is now my pleasure first to introduce Lauren Blackford, who is the acting deputy executive director of the Sierra Club. Sierra Club has been a long-standing climate finance partner with us through all of the decisions that I mentioned before, and it is my delight that Lauren is here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I am the currently acting deputy executive director of the National Sierra Club, but I am a longtime New Yorker. I've lived here my entire adult life. My husband has lived here his entire life, and his mother is a retired school teacher. So speaking on behalf of Sierra Club, of my family, and my fellow New Yorkers, just want to say how very grateful we are to Comptroller Lander and the New York City pension trustees for continuing to prioritize workers' long-term savings by taking action to mitigate the climate crisis and its deep economic impacts. This new policy would help address the growing role of private market investments in financing dirty fossil fuel projects and enabling major polluters that operate with little transparency. It is also another important milestone for the leadership of New York City's pension systems, which have been setting an ambitious and a necessary example for other pensions across the country to follow to confront the systemic threat of climate change. With the impacts of climate change becoming ever clearer, it's never been more urgent to stop financing the industries that drive the crisis, which threatens our economy and so many people's retirement security. So just quickly, the high points, just emphasizing what an important step this climate action is for the beneficiaries of New York City's pension fund, the current and former public school teachers, city workers, and their families who depend on their pension funds to manage their investments for the long term. Emphasize how important it is to focus on private market investments. There's a lot of work on publicly traded investments, but we're seeing more private markets going toward fossil fuels as that public money becomes less important. So this is really groundbreaking and important. This plan is a precedent-setting, first-in-the-nation move for other local and state financial officers and pension funds. We thank Comptroller Lander and the pension funds for really being leaders, not just here in New York City, but for our country as a whole. And in doing so, it's demonstrating that these financial officials have many tools and actions to manage and mitigate climate risks. This is one more step in a series of important steps. And this is a counterweight to the action of climate-denying politicians, which are so often at odds with the interests of our fellow Americans. And so just finally, to thank you, Comptroller Lander, for developing this plan, and to thank the New York City Employees Retirement System, Teachers Retirement System, and Board of Education Retirement System for considering the proposal. We're very fortunate to have you and your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Next up, I talked before about the fact that our holdings go out to the end of the century, and we think here, of course, in terms of our retirees, since that's the obligation we have. But the folks who are going to inherit the planet that we hand off are young people, and that's why their leadership in the climate movement has been such a strong and critical thing. And it has been exciting to watch new generations of climate activists step up and demand that we all act on a faster timeline. And that's why I have been delighted to join Fridays for the Future NYC at many of their actions, most recently for the New York State Superfund Act. Really grateful for all the work you are doing, and I am delighted to introduce youth organizer and high school student Lena Goings from Fridays for the Future NYC. Thank you, Lena.
Just over a month ago, on September 20th, Fridays for Future New York City organized a climate march dubbed the Pillars of Fossil Fuels Strike, calling on polluters, funders, and leaders to change their course and leave fossil fuels in the past for the sake of our collective future. The strike was the result of countless hours of work from me and many other youth organizers and the passion of hundreds of young people who care about saving their futures and the futures of youth around the world. These students coming from all over New York City walked out of school to demand action from the institutions that have been so deeply interwoven with the fossil fuel industry for decades. But today I have skipped school for a different reason, to celebrate. When I heard news of the commitment, I let out a huge sigh of relief for myself, the climate movement, and the young people of this city. I remember the moment very vividly, as it was only a few weeks ago. I was in my environmental science class, and we had just finished going over the ways in which humans have disrupted the carbon cycle. My classmates were visibly disappointed after being reminded of the unfortunate ecological truths of our time, and I myself was feeling rather down. But when I saw the notification that our organizing had paid off, I felt hope. I felt hope for my classmates and for me and for my newborn neighbors. I felt hope and even joy for the children and teens around the world who will see the efforts of New York City and feel inspired to pursue their own climate advocacy. Or better yet, those who will someday be born into a world where they do not have to worry about if their futures are livable because of a climate crisis. The significance of the Comptroller's commitment cannot be overstated. The reality is, despite the 2019 pledge to divest from fossil fuels, we are currently still funding the destruction of our future, the destruction of our city. We're funding storms that can go from Category 1 to Category 5 in a matter of hours and tear apart communities, homes, and lives. We're funding devastating heat waves that made this summer the hottest on record, yet the coolest one for the rest of our lives. The reality is, despite talk of climate action, we are still failing to mitigate this crisis. We are failing to act. Fossil fuel infrastructure is continuing to expand, and there is no climate action with the expansion of fossil fuels. There is no future for our city and for our generation with the expansion of fossil fuels. They say if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere, and I think that's true. And if the New York City government can follow the science and stop investing in all fossil fuels for 3 different New York City pension funds worth billions of dollars, we certainly can do it anywhere. Fossil fuel-funded officials in red states have certainly showed their willingness to leverage their investments for corporate interests, and it's time for our leaders in democratic cities and states to do the opposite, to invest in private equity and asset manager investments in alignment with the livable future that we need and deserve. Today, we celebrate that Comptroller Lander has listened to the youth, to our generation, and has started to actualize the change we want to see in our city. I hope that other cities follow suit in our Comptroller's footsteps as we work towards a just and regenerative society and a livable climate. This is not the end-all be-all, but an extraordinary and necessary step towards a safe, secure, and sustainable future for my generation.
Thank you very much, Lena. I really like the way that you put that in the finance world, in the investing world. When you're looking at your emissions, you talk about financed emissions, right? That's what we say we're measuring. So when we disclose our financed emissions across scope 1, 2, and 3, we're saying what are the emissions we're responsible for financing. But it could be cold language, I would say. Like, a lot of people don't even talk about their financed emissions, so it's pretty out there to say we're going to disclose them all and map a path to get to net zero in our financed emissions. But really what we're saying is exactly what you said. The money that we have invested, that others have invested in burning fossil fuels across the economy, is money invested in the hurricanes, is money invested in the heat waves, is money invested in the flash floods. And the work we're doing here is to make sure we stop investing in those things and start investing in the renewable future that you and Fridays have worked so hard on. So thank you for giving us that. It's my pleasure next to introduce one of the NYSER's pensioners, a beneficiary of our funds, who is a great advocate with 350 NYC, but also someone who has served the city of New York and is counting on the very pensions that we're talking about today. Please welcome Dorian Fulvio.
Yes, hi. It's a good morning, everyone. Yay. I'm Dorian Fulvio, and I'm here representing 350 NYC, but also as a lifelong New Yorker concerned about the future of our city and the planet, a retired public servant, and a member of NYSERS. I want to express my sincere gratitude to Comptroller Lander for making this extraordinary commitment to protect my pension and the pension of thousands of others. In keeping with the goal of net zero by 2040, this action is another big step in the process of reducing the emissions of the pension portfolio. I work for New York City government in information technology, and I also served as my agency's disaster recovery coordinator for about 15 years. And I bring this up because, along with many others, I had to manage the chaos of Hurricane Sandy. I saw firsthand how the city struggled to deal with infrastructure failure and its first experience of having 300,000 public employees unable to get to work. I vowed that when I retired, I would do whatever I could to fight climate change, to try and prevent this from happening again to my city or any city. Next week will mark 12 years since Hurricane Sandy devastated the city. Unfortunately, in that time, we've seen hundreds more climate disasters in the US and across the globe. And yet we keep pouring more carbon emissions into the atmosphere, guaranteeing ourselves an increase in both the frequency and severity of those disasters. My lifestyle, in fact, my survival, now depends entirely on my pension check. I want to be assured that NYSER's investments are stable and secure, and that they are free from opaque holdings in private equity fossil fuel investments. For me, today's announcement makes progress on my vow, moves to curtail emissions and curb future disasters, and safeguards my source of income by limiting these risky investments. This move couples ecological harm reduction with economic risk reduction. So we want to thank Comptroller Lander for showing that prudent investing can also be good for the planet. and I'd like to thank the Coalition for its patience and perseverance in the pursuit of the greater good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorian. It is great to organize together with retirees. It's great to organize together with young people. Climate Families NYC reminds us you could organize intergenerationally, so thank you for that. Liat Olenek is a former public school teacher and an activist with Climate Families NYC. And I'm just going to say personally a friend who was important to me in this process, working and organizing together with advocates and coalitions has its joys and sometimes its challenges, and it is good to have friends you can talk to and work with to make sure we're all moving in the right direction together. So please join me in thanking and welcoming Liat Olenek.
Thank you. Good morning on this hot October day. And thank you to Comptroller Lander for taking this important step. Deep gratitude to the whole coalition for all of your work in getting us here. As Brad said, my name is Liat, and I am a parent of a 2.5-year-old, as well as an organizer with Climate Families NYC, which is a community of more than 1,600 families across the 5 boroughs, demanding bold climate action for our kids and all kids. I'm also, as Brad mentioned, a New York City public school teacher, still technically a DOE employee, although on a leave. And that means I am,
Making the deposits.
yeah. So I am vested in the pension system and a United Federation of Teachers member. And whose school, incidentally, the school that I work at, has flooded multiple times in the last several years due to extreme weather caused by fossil fuels. I'm here because funding fossil fuels puts our planet and the security of our pensions and our futures at risk. I'm here also because my son Rafi is growing up in a world where climate catastrophe is the norm. He sings songs about climate change. He knows what it is, and he knows that when the sky was orange, that was because of fossil fuels. From extreme heat to orange skies to flooding and hurricanes. I still remember keeping him indoors when the smoke from Canada made something as simple as taking him outside to play impossible. And if you've ever had a toddler, you know keeping them inside for several days is very challenging. I'm also expecting a baby in February. And I want my baby to have a world to grow up in. It feels like I'm taking a giant leap of faith in believing in humanity and in our leaders to do the right thing. Ending investments in oil, coal, and gas is the only responsible choice for New Yorkers. And I'm really grateful to see Comptroller Lander leading the way on ruling out using our retirement funds to prop up the expansion of fossil fuels. And I also urge the trustees to accept this proposal. This is an essential step toward ensuring all our city's pension funds is pulled out of risky, destructive fossil fuel expansion, both directly and via fossil fuel enablers on Wall Street. It's time for other cities to follow New York's lead and divest from the fossil fuel industry, because from babies to retirees, our future must be fossil fuel free. Thank you.
Thank you, Liat. I also want to say thank you to Strong Economy for All. I see Mike Kink here. Thank you for being an important part of this coalition. And our final speaker looks like by the orange shirts in the crowd, maybe represents the largest contingent of people that we have here with us today, and certainly one of the strongest organizing forces in New York City for working people and on the issue of the climate crisis. Thank you, Michael Johnson, for joining us today from New York Communities for Change.
Thank you very much. Well, it's still morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Well, my name, as was announced, is Michael Johnson, and I'm a member of the New York Communities for Change. I want to join with the other speakers before me who are celebrating this momentous occasion. But while we are celebrating, I would like to reflect on my experiences prior to this moment. In 2012, my whole apartment was flooded during Superstorm Sandy. Like many New Yorkers, I lost everything and got no support. Imagine seeing rising water which came through the basement onto the first floor where I lived, reaching the waist height, and having to seek safety on the second floor in Coney Island where I first lived. I am from the Caribbean islands of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Caribbean is facing the brunt of climate change created by big oil companies and Wall Street. About 4 months ago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines was devastated by Hurricane Beryl. The devastation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines was no joke, as we say locally. 6 persons would have lost their lives. The impact has left thousands of people homeless. Many people had to be transported in ferries to the mainland to live in shelters. What we see in pictures and videos brought tears to our eyes. Beryl was an unprecedented, record-breaking hurricane. It grew from a tropical depression to a major hurricane in just 42 hours. It was the earliest hurricane to reach Category 5. This did not happen by chance. It happened because of the record warm waters caused by climate change, which is caused by the oil industry and by Wall Street funded the oil industry. The devastation of my island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines was caused by Hurricane Beryl, yes. But maybe it would be more appropriate to call it Hurricane Exxon, or even perhaps Hurricane Citibank. People like us cannot continue to really lose everything because of climate change. The Caribbean, the USA, and the world over cannot continue to be devastated by climate change. And so, it takes courage and a good heart of Mr. Lander to show how much he cares. And I want to thank Comptroller Lander for once again leading the nation by ending new private equity investments into super polluting projects by LNG ports and frack gas pipelines. The investments heat the planet, cause the climate crisis, and also rip off investments of public pension funds. This is an historic moment for the city and the world. This we all must celebrate. Our hard work has paid off. It means that our labor was not in vain. So, when we fight, when we fight, we win. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and NYCC for your organizing and both for that celebration and that sobriety. This is a good step, but I do want to make clear it's just one step and we have a lot more to do. So for clarity's sake today, I'm announcing my support for an exclusion of midstream and downstream fossil fuel infrastructure and instructing my team at the Bureau of Asset Management to develop and bring that policy to the trustees of NYSERS, the Teachers Retirement System, and the Board of Education Retirement System, the 3 funds that have taken prior steps. We've got several members of those funds here today, and their leaders have been strong allies and advocates in the past, and I believe in partnership with you and us that we will be able to move that policy forward. We have a lot of other work to do. We're proud of the steps we took last year to get banks to disclose the ratio of their fossil fuel lending to clean energy lending, but we have to get them to change the ratio of their fossil fuel and energy lending. We're proud of the work we're leading with utilities to demand that they set science-based targets to implement their net zero standards. Now we have to actually get them to do so and implement it. We're proud of the work that we're doing to put pressure on the asset managers who manage the money in our portfolio. We have a long way to go in making sure that they all set and live up to net zero commitments. Advocates in the room have led the way in getting Local Law 97 adopted. We're proud of New York City's local law to transform our buildings, but now we have to make sure it actually gets implemented as it was intended so that we can actually reduce the emissions from our buildings. We're proud of the work that was done in Albany to pass the public power law. Now we need to make sure that there's solar panels on every building in New York City, starting with every public building, but private buildings too, and expand the renewable energy infrastructure, and on and on and on. So this is a good step that has come through both a lot of organizing by the groups in the room and great work by my team. I want to give them a shout out as well. So thank you to John Adler, to Allison Hirsch, to Chief Climate Officer Louise Young, to Jamie Statter, to Jimmy Yan, and a lot of other people who are working hard every day. So give it up for all of them. Those folks are working hard to make sure. Oh, and Steph Fox, thank you, Steph, as well. Okay, and with that, if there are questions, I'm glad to take them. Shaq will.
Topic questions. So if anyone has any on-topic questions, Justin?
I assume the plan for your current private holdings and maybe in midstream and downstream as well as upstream, the plan is to let those run out. There's no plan to sell those on the secondaries market or recommend doing that or anything.
Yeah, I mean, in general, that's not our call. I mean, so, for folks in the room, your public holdings are basically, think of the stock market. You buy and sell stocks in companies, and those companies are, and so you can do that at any time. I mean, it takes a little time, but so when we divested from fossil fuel reserve owners in our public markets, that meant getting rid of our Exxon stock because we didn't want to be part of Hurricane Exxon anymore. Private markets investments work differently. You essentially write a check to a fund and you've given them the money, and then they buy the companies that they're going to buy, and then they come back to you for a next fund. So with most of our private markets holdings, we're on fund 4 or 5 with them, and we can make instructions about what we will and won't buy going forward. But the things that we have already funded in the past, we can't sell in the ways that you do on the stock market. So yes, I mean, we have in the past invested in pipelines and LNG terminal in funds that invest in midstream and downstream fossil fuel infrastructure. And those will continue to be financed emissions that show on our books. We already bought and paid for them. What we are saying, we'll be saying with this proposal, what I'm supporting today is to say going forward, we would not buy any future midstream or downstream infrastructure.
What's your current holdings of such fossil fuel?
Yeah, that is a great question, and the kind of thing that will be part of the research and development of the proposal that the team is doing right now. So what we'll be doing now is, and this is kind of how we've proceeded both on other climate actions like the public holdings divestment, but also other non-climate investments. So for example, the funds that in past at one point had invested in private prison holdings in its private equity portfolio and then made a decision and developed a policy to exclude them going forward. So what we'll do now is do the research on what are the holdings we have in the kinds of funds we invest in. What are the things, the kinds of investments that they're making? Part of what we believe makes this make sense is the opportunity to scale up our investments in renewable energy and climate solutions. So we want to look at the landscape as well. We believe that the future of energy investment is in renewables and not in fossil fuels. So we want to compare, as I said before, as of today, the holdings we have in renewable energy and climate solutions is about $11 billion. We hope that that will grow, over time to as much as $50 billion, and we'll have more details about our current holdings and our future plans and the policy we develop and bring to the trustees for passage.
How do you imagine this is going to affect your existing manager relationships?
We are already a tough limited partner to have, and our general partners know it, and I think that's a good thing. So in the world of private markets investments, the pension funds are asset owners or limited partners. The general partners are these private equity and infrastructure funds. And New York City retirement systems have a tradition of pushing our GPs. So, for example, recently we became the first fund in the country to set responsible property management standards. Private equity has bought a lot of residential real estate, and we were concerned that they did not have good standards for tenant protections and other things. And we set standards and said, going forward, we're going to expect our private markets managers to live up to them. So they've kind of come to expect from us that we're going to be rigorous about workers' rights, about affordability and housing, and definitely about climate. And we believe that that makes for better businesses and better funds. Some of our partners, some of our asset managers have that point of view as well and come to us with, here's a fund that we're doing that's going to be all in clean energy, or that has new practices of supporting worker ownership. And some of them are people that do the business as usual and are being pushed by us to do better. So I think it'll be a range. I suspect some of our PE and infrastructure partners will be excited about this because they are making the climate transition and looking for investors who want to be in renewables and climate solutions. And some of them will not even know we did this and will come to us with a fund that includes midstream or downstream fossil fuel infrastructure, and we will have to point them to our exclusion once we've developed and implemented the policy and make clear to them that that's not an investment that we're willing to make.
No more on topic, any off topic?
So I saw Councilmember Brannon's letter, Finance Chair Brannon's letter, and of course he's a friend as well. I thought there was a good reason for concern there. As he noted, we had actually included Garner in a review that we had done of the staffing companies that the city has engaged for asylum seeker services, including .go and Garner and two others that I should be able to remember, but that are in the study. And in several areas, as he pointed out, Garner was charging the city more for a particular service than the others were. And we were, as I've said many times, so .go had people, asylum seekers in its care in New York City and upstate. When we were finally able to get the city to cancel that, no-bid emergency wasteful .go contract, $432 million, upstate, a great thing happened. It is being transferred to the Jewish Family Services of Western New York, who, with the 500 people there, are going to make sure everybody gets access to legal services, work authorization, job placement, and pathway to stable housing, like just what we should be doing. Down here in New York City, they're just taking the .go money and moving it over to Garner to do the same old without any of those outcomes. The administration committed 6 months ago to put out an RFP for public bidding, and I would hope with outcomes instead of just here's the money, and that has not happened yet. So I think Justin's letter is apt. We have limited audit capacity, so I can't yet promise that we will begin an audit of Garner specifically in the way that we did of .go, but I can promise that we will continue to be looking at the asylum seeker procurement and continuing to push to make sure that it abides by the city's rules and aims at real outcomes.
I noticed that the New York City firefighters and police pensions
We will bring this one to them. So it's not, we believe that it is critical for all of the city's funds to move forward. And it's not true that the police pension fund and the fire pension fund do participate in the scaling up of renewables and climate solutions, and they're enthusiastic investors in those transition investments. And they've joined, for example, in renewables and climate solutions, and they're enthusiastic investors in those transition investments.